As we sit together in the quietness, each of us is involved in the great private intimacy of his own experiences, experiences that are fresh in our minds because they are still present in our lives. And there are those moments when we have wrestled with some great weakness and have failed in our effort in its conquest, but we have not given up, and we gather strength in this moment of lull that we may pick up the struggle again when this hour is over. Those experiences in which we have been disciplined in courage, we have watched our own fears mount and measure us and move in to rule and dominate our days. And out of the depths of our own spirits, some new dimension of strength has come, and we have not been defeated. The courage that is born in us as we have lived with loved ones whose burdens and whose wearinesses have overtaken them in the journey, and we would help but do not know how, would say the right word but do not know what, and we have sat in the silence with them until between us and them has been born a new dimension of communication and strength, so that we are deeply satisfied and the load is eased. Those experiences that are ours because these times are ours, times of great violences, times of great confusions and disorders in our own land and in the world, and we do not know how to relate to these things in any way that will give a witness to our private concerns and our personal desires. And we live in the midst of these things, trusting and hoping that the time will come when we will find the place at which we may register our resources, our mind, our disciplines, our spirits, to the end that where there is chaos, there will be peace. Where there is disorder, there will be order. Where there is bitterness and hatred, there will be love. And thus, our Father, we offer the raw materials of our living. On thy altar, in this moment of waiting in thy presence, brood over the stuff of life that we share with thee until it becomes fully responsive to thy will and our private thoughts and our private hopes and our private desires may be illumined and enlarged and become one with thy great hopes and thy great desires for thy children. This is somewhat the way we feel, our Father, as we wait in thy presence. Accept these stirrings as our living sacrament to thee, our Father. God does not release us from the battle, but he shares the fight. He does not set us free from the possibility of pain and tears, but he feels the hurt of our wounds, the salt bitterness of our sorrow. He spends himself not only with us, but for us, and in the travel of redemptive passion anticipates the victories of the Spirit. We are never to forget that we are all so tied up in one bundle that peace and reconciliations in which others are not involved are quite impossible. The note of service must be deepened, and in our care for those who lie wounded or broken along the road, we shall forget our own wounds and our own wearinesses. So conceived, so reinforced, life is never impossible, but does indeed become an adventure whose greatness is its own best justification, and whose difficulties may become for the faithful and the discerning but stairs of ascent to radiant and to triumphant regions. We are continuing our thinking together about the moment of crisis. The simple definition upon which we are operating in our thought is this, that crisis for the individual is the experience through which he passes when he is aware that his life is the battleground between two forces, one moving ahead into the unexplored, the untried, the unknown, the other pulling back to establish anew the status quo, to hold that which has been gained from the past and conserve it and freeze it. The crisis is resolved when the individual says yes to one or to the other. There is There is something very awesome about the living of one's individual life, because there is a sense in which the things that you do or that I do seem to be the result of choices which we make, deeds seem to spring from the movement of the individual mind and decision and desire, so that the measure of responsibility for the individual act, for the integrity of the act, is boundless and absolute. That's on the one hand. On the other, life, the private life of the individual seems, whether he realizes it or not, to be that individual's response to some movement, some social force, some concept which did not arise in his own mind or in his own experience, but is a part of the climate in which he lives, a part of the great, apparently impersonal ends towards which all life moves. There is a sense in which the individual's life seems to be manipulated, as if he was some puppet. Another sense in which your life and my life seems to be independent and indigenous and free. We see this illustrated, and I will get to the point. If you're patient. We see this illustrated when we watch a Greek play, for instance. The characters who are acting on the stage seem to be making their own decisions. They act that way. They seem to be responsible, involved in ends which they foresee and sometimes which they anticipate. But those who look at the play also see that above the stage, in a sense, the gods are at work. And the gods are really pulling the string. Agamemnon thinks that he decided this, but the gods pulled the string, and Agamemnon moved as if he moved himself. Now this is the background for our thinking together about the application of this principle of crisis in the life of the great unknown prophet of the exile. He is known in some circles technically as Deutero-Isaiah, the second Isaiah. The Jewish community had been taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. Only a handful of people were left. Jerusalem was destroyed. There was a prophet down there in Babylon, Ezekiel, who wrestled with the problem, can Jehovah be with us when we are no longer in Jehovah's territory? And he comes forward with the great insight that God is not local. That God is not earthbound. And the logic of that, of course, is that God is not national. How hard the human race, what a hard time the human race has had with this. God is a Protestant. He's a Catholic. He's a Hindu. Oh, well, that's an aside. Now to go on. There came a change in the situation there because Nebuchadnezzar died and someone else came into power. And this person who came into power thought that he should deal a little more kindly with captive peoples, for Nebuchadnezzar had kept the Jewish king in jail 37 years. And the new king said, perhaps if I can grant more freedom to the people who are captured, then they will have the kinds of stakes in the established order that will generate a dimension of loyalty and dependability. So he let Jehoiakim out of prison and invited him to be a guest in the palace. Now the prophet, the unknown prophet of the exile, was watching all of this at a distance, for he, remember, was in Jerusalem and Judah. He wasn't down there, but he could watch it all. And he began to brood over his destiny and the meaning of life and the meaning of Israel. And he saw that when the change in the historical circumstances had opened up a way by which the fulfillment of one of the mighty acts of God could be realized, namely, that this separate and special community with whom God had the covenant, this community, because it had an insight into the true meaning of God, would be saddled with the responsibility to become the tutors of mankind, to give to them, growing out of their own experience, the benefit of the knowledge of the true God. This was their role. This was their responsibility as one of the mighty acts of God. So, what happens to this dream, you see, when there is no central place of worship? Jerusalem is gone, and you can't teach if you don't have some sort of center. So that when he saw that it looked as if the king was going to let the people free, then he was sure that the movement of the Spirit of God in the people would make them respond to the announcement that now is your opportunity to come home, come back to Jerusalem, away from all of these places where you have been scattered, and rebuild the city and establish a central place of worship out from which you may go as evangelists all over the world, teaching about the true God. He could hardly wait for the great tidal wave to come. And what happens? You can guess if you don't know. They didn't do it. They were comfortable in Babylon and these other places. They had made the adjustment to the culture. They had found a way of living and thinking in the community, and this meant uprooting themselves and going back to Jerusalem. And the prophet had felt that the hand of God was at work in the scattering of the people, because you see, if they are to become the teachers of the Gentiles, if they are to become the teachers of all of the peoples of the earth, then it is important that they know something about the habits and psychology, something about the way in which the different peoples of the world think and feel, so that there would be an orientation to their minds, and from within the framework of that orientation you would know where the growing edge is in their minds. And you could apply then the exposure of the wisdom and the insight of the true God to this growing edge. And this is the way the knowledge of God is to cover the earth. But it didn't happen. And the prophet, in his first great crisis, felt that perhaps he had been mistaken. The ends that he had set up for Israel were just wishful thinking. That God was at work, yes, and he thought God was at work in history when God inspired Cyrus to open the way, and even though Cyrus was a pagan and didn't know anything about Jehovah can use anybody. But it all collapsed. And then a new idea came into his mind as he sought to work his way out of the crisis. And this was the idea that the people, even within the Jewish community, there must be a sharp line drawn between those who are responsive to the will of God and those who are not responsive to the will of God. And up to this time, he was sure that to be born into the Jewish community meant ipso facto, I would be responsive to the will of God and to the purposes of God and be sensitive to God's ethical and moral will. But now a new principle emerges. No, the thing that makes the true Jew is not anything that is organic. It is not anything that is cultural. It is something that is spiritual. It is the experience of the knowledge of the true God to which the individual responds. This is the thing that makes him unique. Therefore, the logic of it is, any man who responds in this way to the moral will becomes unique. And the door is open now for the application of something brand new, a great and creative concept of universality. But this is far ahead. When the prophet found that the people did not respond and that he had to rethink the whole thing, he was depressed. God had failed him and the world, or he had misunderstood God, or that he himself was a victim of pride and arrogance to think that he, just this little man, would be in a position to understand the great creative movement of the will of God in the world. and brooding over this, looking at Israel, looking at the people, the handful of people who had come back. How can God make teachers out of this miserable-looking group of people? Even God can't perform a miracle like that. And it was then that he made what perhaps is the greatest, or at least one of the greatest spiritual discoveries that the mind of man has ever made. And what was it? That if in response to this shift on the political scene, all of the people had come pouring back to Jerusalem to establish the temple and to set up the process for the evangelization of the world. Anybody who watched that could have said, God didn't do that. It was simply the response to the dynamics of human history. It would require nothing creative to do this. But if God can take people who were weak, who had very little to offer except their commitment, if he could take them and let them become the creative tutors of mankind, if he could make them so aware of the meaning of their mission in the world that they would take upon themselves all of the suffering and all of the brutality and all of the sin and the wickedness and immorality of mankind and absorb it as a part of their commitment to the moral ends of God, then they would reveal that it is only through suffering, through identification with the most abject needs of mankind, that the Spirit, the redemptive Spirit of the living God, can be operative and be effective. In other words, what he discovered was what the individual discovers here and there as he lives along. There comes a time in your life or my life when the situations with which we have to do are so overwhelming that we know that we cannot reduce them to any kind of manageable unit of control. The suffering through which we pass seems unrelieved, and there is no way by which we can get a handle to manipulate it so that it will no longer be the force of destruction that divides the mind and tortures the spirit. And then, in the midst of this, sometimes the individual makes the great discovery that the peace that passeth understanding is the peace that comes when the pain of life is not relieved. It is the peace that comes shimmering on the crest of a wave of pain. It is the spear of frustration transformed into a shaft of light. This is what the prophet found. So he talks. He talks about the new role. And let me read, as I conclude this, let me read what he said. Because this is he says, "Behold, my servant shall prosper. He shall be honored and greatly exalted. For his face was marred more than any other, and his visage than the children of men. So shall the mighty ones be startled at him. Who would have believed it? And to whom was the Lord's arm revealed? For he grew up as a slender shoot before us. This is what the other nations of the world are saying as they look at this little handful of people. As a root out of the arid ground, he hath no form nor charm that we should notice him, no beauty that we should admire him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with pain. As one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Yet it was our woes that he bore, and our sorrows that he carried. While we accounted him punished, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. On him fell the chastisement that made us whole, and with his stripes were we healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned away, each to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the penalty, charged upon him the guilt of us all. And then this is his comfort. When his life shall make atonement for sin, he will see his seed, will prolong his days, and the Lord's purpose will prosper in his hand. He will see the fruit of his mortal travel. In knowing himself true, will he be satisfied. My servant will bring many to the right, for he will carry their sins. This is the heart, it seems to me, of the great dilemma. When the individual is no longer involved in ends which to him are just private and personal ends. But when the ends that are meaningful to him become ends that transcend his little life, that have to do with the destiny of a race, the destiny of a nation, the destiny of mankind, and he has to live as a private human being, eating, sleeping, involved in all of the crud dimensions of ordinary living. And at the same time, he may be aware that his life is a part of a movement, the ends of which extend far beyond the length and breadth of his lifetime. And he has to try to give the kind of meaning to his little experience that is sensed by him when he becomes one with what to him is the destiny of mankind. And when this happens to you, then nothing that involves the human race is alien to you. The weaknesses become your weaknesses. The sins become your sins. All of the blind stupidity that wrecks the collective life or the individual life, this becomes yours. You no longer are privileged to detach yourself from an increasing involvement in the collective destiny of mankind. And this means, you see, that at one level of your life, you have a sense of emotional security. Because emotional security simply means the experience of having your needs satisfied. As a private person, you have this sense of emotional security. Another dimension of your life, the degree to which you become involved, you sense some ultimate meaning in life. And the need to experience the fulfillment of that. This cannot be bound by any interval of time. So that one side of you leaps ahead and resolves the crisis created by living into a time that is not yet. Another side of you pulls back. I love my family. I love my little world. I love all the little tranquilities that lull me into peace. I don't want to disturb this. So the tension. And that's why it is always a terrible thing whenever the spirit of a man is exposed to ends and movements and destinies that swing out beyond the length and breadth of his little life. And it is so much easier to eat, sleep, work, love, die, than to sense the winds that blow from distant shores and know that the set of your sail must be there. There is a quality of suffering in this that must be the constant, persistent experience of the living God. I don't know. Sometimes it seems to me that it's better not to see the light. Than to see it and then try to be content with your little darkness. I don't know. Walk beside us, our Father, in the way that we take, and grant unto our spirits the quality of peace that thou dost deem we need and can abide this day and forever and ever.